to the Access California Recovery 101 e-learning module. Just a brief background on Access before we jump into the material. Access California, a program of NorCal MHA, is a consumer-led stakeholder advocacy program funded by the California Mental Health Services Act and the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission. NorCal MHA was founded in 1946 and is the oldest continuously operated consumer advocacy agency in California. NorCal MHA is a peer-run organization that specifically hires people with lived experience. So what is Access? Access stands for Advancing Client and Community Empowerment through Sustainable Solutions. Here's a quick video that sums up what we do here at Access.
If you live in California and are familiar with public mental health services, it's important that you get to know us. We're Access California, a program of NorCal MHA. We are the statewide consumer advocacy program funded by the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission and Prop 63, the Mental Health Services Act. Whether you're an individual who is receiving services or has received services in the past, you work for an agency providing these services, or you are a county-run behavioral health system, we are here to support you. Access California stands for Advancing Client and Community Empowerment through Sustainable Solutions, but you can call us Access for short. Empowerment through Sustainable Solutions? That's a big task. It requires research, understanding the current system and challenges, including policy and legislation. Outreach, raising awareness, and getting statewide buy-in at all levels of the system, and maintaining a statewide network of advocates. Advocacy, turning that awareness into action, being proactive and practical about what can be done differently, and challenging suboptimal practices. Education, mentoring and creating leaders, sharing knowledge about recovery, peer support, the stakeholder process, and best practices across the state by providing technical assistance for counties and providers. Although a big task, NorCal MHA has been a leader in consumer advocacy in California for over 70 years. Access California is ready for the challenge. Learn more about Access California or how to get involved on our website, www.accesscalifornia.org, or call our Ombudsman and Advocacy Helpline, 707-572-HELP. That is 707-572-4357.
At Access, we value advocacy, recovery, and peer support. Let's spend some time talking about what that means. In terms of advocacy, we are striving for meaningful stakeholder participation, active solicitation of community's feedback, expanded opportunities for stakeholder involvement, and stakeholder inclusion at all levels, which includes policy development, program planning and implementation, and services delivery, oversight, and administration. With recovery, we're seeking infusion of recovery principles in all aspects of services delivery, which includes client voice and choice, individualized services, shared power and decision-making, and treatment always being voluntary. We advocate for recovery-based training and support for mental health professionals, as well as tracking, reporting, and analysis of recovery outcomes in all mental health programs. Finally, with peer support, Access advocates for fidelity to the evidence-based model, incorporation and expansion of peer support in all mental health programs, and living wages, ongoing professional development, and opportunities for advancement in peer support positions. Reflecting on those values we just discussed, the core of what Access does includes research, advocacy, education, and engagement. We also offer a stakeholder ombudsman and advocacy helpline. Stakeholders can report barriers to participation in perceived violations of the community program planning process, and Access will review the complaint, conduct research, and will initiate a resolution with the local or state mental health agency in question. Additionally, callers can receive help navigating our online, local, or statewide advocacy directories and assistance advocating for mental health needs on the local grassroots level. To reach the Stakeholder Ombudsman and Advocacy Helpline, call 707 572 4357. An easy way to remember this number is 707 572 HELP, HELP. Now that you have a background on Access, let's get started with Recovery 101, Fundamental Principles of Person-Centered Care. In this module, we will cover the meaning of recovery, key components of recovery including person-centered and client-driven care, barriers to recovery, the case for recovery in mental health services, and ways to create and sustain a recovery-oriented workplace. Part 1. What is recovery? Before we can understand what recovery is, we first have to ask, recovery from what? In this context, we mean recovery from mental illness. Many people don't like the term mental illness, and neither do we. But we need to use it in this narrow context with a limited meaning. Here, we use the term mental illness to refer to a current or state or condition of unwellness. We are not referring to a specific mental health diagnosis. But what is a mental illness? The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, defines mental illness as a serious functional impairment that substantially interferes with or limits one or more major life activities, such as basic living skills, instrumental living skills, and functioning in social, family, and vocational and educational contexts. But what about mental health? The World Health Organization says that mental health is not just the absence of a mental disorder. It is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, and can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So what do we notice about these definitions? These definitions involve many more factors than just the individual and suggest that interventions and treatments for mental illness should also look beyond the medical setting and consider the interplay of the individual with their environment, their community, and with society. Recovery is real. One of the most robust findings in schizophrenia research is that a substantial proportion of those with the illness will recover completely, and many more will regain good social functioning. Much recent research suggests that working helps people recover from schizophrenia. Advances in vocational rehabilitation have made this more feasible. A growing body of research supports the concept that empowerment is an important component of the recovery process, and that user-driven services and a focus on reducing internalized stigma are valuable in empowering the person with schizophrenia and improving the outcome from the illness. Recovery is also complex. Recovery is subjective and can mean different things to different people. It can be both a process and an outcome. It's important to keep in mind that recovery is more than just an absence of symptoms of a mental health disorder. But if recovery is subjective and complex, how is it defined? The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, is the agency within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that leads public health efforts to advance the behavioral health of the nation. SAMHSA's mission is to reduce the impact of substance abuse and mental illness on America's communities. Congress established SAMHSA in 1992 to make substance use and mental disorder information, services, and research more accessible. SAMHSA's 2012 working definition of recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to meet their full potential. Now let's break that down a bit. The process of change. So it's about the journey, not just the destination. Improve health and wellness. So here we're talking about more than the absence of mental illness. Self-directed life. People diagnosed with mental illness are capable of taking care of themselves and taking control of their lives. Strive and reach their full potential. People with mental illnesses get better and move on. They aren't always sick and they won't always experience a relapse. They don't stay fragile forever. There are two main models of recovery, the medical model and the recovery model. While the medical model puts the emphasis on clinical outcomes, the recovery model emphasizes client or consumer goals. It's important to note that these two models can not only coexist, but can complement each other when used correctly. Now let's take some time to learn a little bit more about each model. The goal of the medical model is to treat illness. Outcomes are measured by things like symptom reduction, medical usage, and levels of functioning. The medical model is not without its criticisms. In recent years, consumer advocacy groups have expressed concerns related to how clients are classified. Many take exception to terminology that seems to put them in a box with a label that follows them through life but does not capture the fullness of their identities. A person with a recurring disorder may also be a mother, a plumber, a pianist, a student, or a person with diabetes, just to cite a few examples. Referring to an individual as a person who has a specific disorder, a person with depression, rather than a depressive, a person with schizophrenia rather than a schizophrenic, or a person who uses heroin rather than an addict, is more acceptable to many clients because it implies that they have many characteristics besides a stigmatized illness, and therefore that they are not defined by this illness. The goal of the recovery model is to holistically improve lives. Symptoms of a mental health disorder may not always result in an impairment in functioning. For instance, someone who is diagnosed with ADHD may not experience any significant impairment if they work at a job that involves a physical activity, varied tasks, and mental stimulation. Think of the uptick in diagnoses of children with ADHD in recent decades. What's changed in the school environment that is correlated with this increase? Some examples to offer: reduction or elimination of physical education, art, music, recess, or after school programs that provide outlets to release pent up physical and creative energy. Increased use of technology and reduction of physical activity. Increased reliance on cars, buses, and other transportation that require minimal physical activity. So we may be labeling kids as the problem when their environment has changed and kids' physiology has not adapted. The same child who has trouble functioning in a strict environment where the classes are overcrowded and the school is underfunded may do just fine in a school that provides more creative outlets and a free-flowing learning environment. Adults are similar in this regard. The environment and social context may have a big impact on the ability to cope with one's symptoms, and people can choose to treat their symptoms in a variety of ways that are subjectively right to them. They can exercise more, they can change their diet, they can take medications, they can change their social environment, they can engage in activities and relationships that they find personally meaningful. Of these, only one is medication. Now let's move into part 2, key recovery concepts. Along with defining recovery, SAMHSA has established 4 major dimensions of recovery, as well as 10 guiding principles of recovery. The 4 major dimensions of recovery are health, home, purpose, and community. As you can see, health is just one component of recovery. It's the first one listed and perhaps even the most important one, but it's still only 25% of the picture. Also, notice it doesn't say mental health. Recovery includes psychosocial factors that contribute to personal well being. Other people have a significant role to play in a person's recovery from mental illness, such as in home and the community. We do know what makes people more vulnerable, and these are called risk factors. Each of the following is an independent risk factor, and the more you have, the greater your risk. Let's take some time to discuss each one in detail. Family history. This refers to a biological connection that has been diagnosed with a mental illness or has experienced mental health problems such as addiction, suicide, or suicide attempts. This can refer to current or past history. Personal history. If someone has had a previous episode of a mental illness, they are more at risk for having another episode than someone who has never had one. Trauma. This refers to chronic trauma or an isolated incident of trauma. Examples of chronic trauma include living through a war, child abuse, or domestic abuse. Other examples of traumatic events can involve being the victim of a crime or witnessing violence. It can also refer to physical trauma, like being in a car accident or having a significant illness or injury. It can refer to a critical traumatic incident, like being in a fire or bank robbery. Environment. This refers to the psychosocial conditions in which someone lives. A person's environment might create substantial risk, such as exposure to ongoing violence, neighborhood poverty, or institutional stigma and discrimination, such as racism and heterosexism. It could also include the environment in which someone was raised, even if they no longer live in this environment. Examples of this include inadequate parental involvement and supervision, parents with substance abuse histories, lack of healthcare and other resources, childhood maltreatment or neglect, peer rejection, and association with delinquent peer groups. Personal stress. This involves significant financial problems, relationship problems, housing problems, problems with children, parents, or other family members, and it can also include workplace stress. This involves work overload, chaotic environment, changing priorities, high demand with low control, lack of resources, lack of training to do the job well, and a very significant stressor, lack of social support at work. Social isolation. Research into social prejudice and stigma seems to be finding a link between social isolation and increased risk for developing a mental illness. Also, research into disability rates is finding a possible link between social isolation and increased risk for depression. This is seen when employees go off work for a physical issue and then develop a clinical depression, which keeps them off work even after they have recovered from the physical issue. Remember that having even one of these risk factors means you are more vulnerable, and the more you have, the more your risk increases. So even if you just have one of these risk factors, you may want to take a look at how you're taking care of your mental health in order to minimize the impact of that risk factor. Jumping back to those 4 dimensions of recovery, health is defined as overcoming or managing one's illnesses or symptoms and making informed, healthy choices that support physical and emotional well-being. We know that people with a serious mental health diagnosis tend to die much earlier than those without such a diagnosis, as much as 20 years sooner. Individuals who have serious behavioral health conditions and lack financial resources are often unable to access quality care, either for their behavioral health conditions or for their health problems. Properly addressing behavioral health conditions is necessary because untreated mental and substance use disorders not only negatively impact a person's behavioral health, but can also lead to worse outcomes for co-occurring physical health problems. Good behavioral health is associated with better physical health outcomes, improved educational attainment, increased economic participation, and meaningful social relationships. Dimension 2 is home. To recover, people need a safe and stable place to live. Permanent supportive housing has emerged as a model in which individuals who have mental and substance use disorders can secure stable housing and receive the range of supports they need to manage mental illnesses or other disabilities. Research and practice reveal that supportive housing decreases symptoms, increases housing stability, and is cost effective. Dimension 3, purpose, refers to meaningful daily activities such as a job, school, volunteerism, family caretaking, or creative endeavors, and the independence, income, and resources necessary to participate in society. Let's use work as an example. So, how does working impact one's personal identity, help develop motivation, and provide hope for the future? Well, when you're unemployed and someone asks you what you do, what do you say? Nothing. And because so much of our identity is wrapped up in what we do, when we are unemployed, it can actually feel like we are nothing. Being unemployed is associated with increased rates of mental disorders, especially among men, and with relapse and substance abuse. So, when we see how being unemployed can definitely affect how we feel about ourselves, even unpaid volunteering provides a sense of contribution and meaning. It is also a way to attain important job skills and interact with others to prevent social isolation. We know that educational attainment is correlated with higher income and better physical health. Maybe because education helps people understand the benefits of taking care of their physical health, or maybe because it gives them access to resources to ensure their health needs are met. Unfortunately, mental illnesses often begin when young adults are completing high school and looking at future opportunities and career plans. Finally, dimension 4 is community. Individuals with behavioral health conditions do not recover in isolation. They recover in families and communities. However, even if they live in neighborhoods alongside people without disabilities, individuals with mental conditions may lack socially valued activity, adequate income, personal relationships, recognition and respect from others, and a political voice. They remain, in a very real sense, socially excluded. The exclusion comes from society's attitudes and fears about persons with mental and substance use disorders, as much or more than from any disability associated with these disorders. Insufficient natural supports exist in the community to involve persons with mental health disorders in shared social activities, either with peers or with members of the community at large. Mutual support groups play a critical role for many, but there's still an unmet need. A person with behavioral health condition is as capable of living a full life integrated in a community as anyone else. Successful recovery from mental disorders is an important societal goal, especially attainment of levels of recovery that enhance economic security and reduce reliance on government funded disability income support programs. The goal is for people with behavioral health conditions to flourish, not merely function in their communities. Now let's look at how these four major components of recovery address these known risk factors. So health, mental, and physical wellness can mitigate the risk factors of family history, and personal stress. Home, a safe and stable place to live, can mitigate the risk factors of trauma, environment, and personal stress. And purpose and community both mitigate the risk of isolation. Next, we'll look at SAMHSA's 10 guiding principles of recovery. We'll go over these in detail in the coming slides, but for now, they are hope, person driven, many pathways, holistic, peer support, relational, culture, addresses trauma, strengths and responsibility, and respect. Principle 1 is hope. Recovery emerges from hope. Hope is internalized and can be fostered by peers, families, providers, allies, and others. If you have no hope that things will improve, then you have no reason to take personal action to make things better. Interacting with others who have recovered can inspire hope in those who are experiencing a mental illness. Principle 2 is that recovery is person driven. A major premise of the recovery model is that people with mental illnesses are fully capable of making good decisions and appropriate choices for themselves when given the information, resources, and support necessary to do so. People with a mental health diagnosis are not developmentally delayed, immature, incompetent, childlike, fragile, or forever broken. They can be trusted to think for themselves and make good choices. However, to accomplish this, they must have access to resources to make informed decisions, initiate recovery, build on their strengths, and gain control. This control can feel uneasy to family members, practitioners, or caretakers who have exercised significant control over the individual's life. These helpers may begin to see themselves differently or question their own personal identities when their roles begin to shift and people in recovery start making decisions for themselves, much like the role shifts that take place for parents of teenagers transitioning into adulthood. Principle 3 states that recovery occurs through many pathways. Individuals are unique with distinct needs, strengths, preferences, goals, cultures, and backgrounds, including trauma experiences that affect and determine their pathways to recovery. Recovery is built on the multiple capacities, strengths, talents, coping abilities, resources, and inherent value of each individual. There is no one right way. According to Dr. Mark Reagans, a psychiatrist and renowned supporter of the recovery model, setbacks are inevitable. We should not take it personally or get down on ourselves when the people we serve experience a setback. Because setbacks are a natural part of the recovery process, it is essential to foster resilience for all individuals and families. Relapses are not evidence of a defective nature. They are a normal part of recovery, and relapse does not mean someone will never recover. Principle 4 is recovery is holistic. This means that the array of services and supports available should be integrated and coordinated. They should encompass an individual's whole life, including mind, body, spirit, and community. Some examples of holistic aspects of recovery include self-care, family, housing, employment, transportation, education, community participation, clinical treatment, services and supports, primary health care, dental care, alternative services, faith and spirituality, and social networks. Well, we'll be talking about system barriers to recovery later that make difficult integrated and coordinated care. Peer support is principle number 5. Mutual support and mutual aid groups, including the sharing of experiential knowledge and skills, as well as social learning, play an invaluable role in recovery. Through helping others and giving back to the community, one helps oneself. While peers and allies play an important role for many in recovery, their role for children and youth might be slightly different. Peer supports for families are very important for children with behavioral health problems and can also play a supportive role for youth in recovery. We will be talking more about peer support later in this training. Principle 6 is relationships. Recovery is supported through relationships and social networks. An important factor in the recovery process is the presence and involvement of people who believe in the person's ability to recover. We offer hope, support, and encouragement, and who also suggest strategies for resources for change. Family members, peers, providers, faith groups, community members, and other allies form vital support networks. Principle 7 states that recovery is culturally based and influenced. Cultural competence describes the ability of an individual or organization to interact effectively with people of different cultures. To produce positive change, practitioners must understand the cultural context of the community they serve and have the willingness and skills to work within that context. This means drawing on community based values, traditions, and customs, and working with knowledgeable people from the community to plan, implement, and evaluate prevention activities. Supporting recovery requires that mental health and addiction services be responsive and respectful to the health beliefs, practices, and cultural and linguistic needs of diverse people and groups. Actively address diversity in the delivery of services, and seek to reduce health disparities in access and outcomes. Principle 8 is that recovery addresses trauma. But what is trauma? Well, the term trauma refers to experiences that cause intense physical and or psychological stress reactions. It can refer to a single event, multiple events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically and emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well being. Although many people who experience a traumatic event will go on with their lives without lasting negative effects, others will have more difficulty and experience traumatic stress reactions. Practitioners must interact with each client to facilitate the client's recovery and avoid re traumatization by collaborating with clients to foster an understanding of integrated treatment for clients with histories of trauma and substance use or concurrent disorders, help them acknowledge trauma and heal from it. But it is important not to force people to revisit traumas they have moved past or are not ready to address, as this can be re traumatizing in itself. To help them develop strategies to minimize the impacts of triggers, vulnerabilities, or other factors that contribute to re traumatization. Support self efficacy, self determination, dignity, and personal control, and to encourage the choice of treatment options that ensure physical, psychological, and emotional safety. Secondary trauma is especially relevant to behavioral health providers. Secondary trauma is trauma related stress reactions and symptoms resulting from exposure to another individual's traumatic experiences rather than from exposure directly to a traumatic event. Secondary trauma can occur among behavioral health service providers across all behavioral health settings and among all professionals who provide services to those who have experienced trauma. Principle 9 is strengths and responsibility. Recovery involves individual, family, and community strengths and responsibilities. We can all take action to support recovery, even if we are not directly impacted by a mental health challenge. Individuals, families, and communities have strengths and resources that serve as a foundation for recovery, as we all have a role to play in supporting or undermining recovery. Mental illness doesn't happen overnight. Many factors converge and contribute to the development of mental illness, so the same factors play a role in recovery as well. Individuals have responsibility for their own self care and journeys of recovery, supporting peers, and advocating for their individual and collective needs. Families and significant others have responsibility for supporting their loved ones' recovery and independence, and for allowing loved ones to speak for themselves. Communities have responsibility for providing opportunities and resources to address discrimination and for fostering social inclusion and recovery. The last guiding principle, Principle 10, is respect. Recovery is based on respect, self acceptance, developing a positive and meaningful sense of identity, and regaining belief in oneself are particularly important. Just to recap, SAMHSA's 10 guiding principles of recovery are hope, person driven, many pathways, holistic, peer support, relational, cultural, addresses trauma, strengths and responsibilities, and respect. Now, let's explore some of the most common barriers to recovery. Recovery is difficult It is difficult for individuals, families, helpers, communities, and society. But not recovering is even tougher. Recovery requires time, dedication, effort, resources, and energy and cannot happen in a vacuum. This video shows what it can feel like when you really have a need to be heard, as well as what it can feel like when you're trying to help someone in their recovery. Our intent is not to discourage or blame, simply recognizing the challenges we all face. The first step to changing anything is recognizing it. So imagine the woman in the video is a client, and the man is someone trying to help her through recovery.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can go on? We can work it out. We can work it out.
Here is a thought exercise for considering barriers at all levels. Before continuing, pause this presentation and consider potential barriers for each of these designations: the individual, group, provider, and the system. Press play once you have your answers. Individual barriers. Many people who are struggling with a mental health challenge may not know they have one. How can one begin to recover if they don't recognize the problem? For example, people may say things like, "I've always been this way. I take after my mother, my father. Oh, you're the problem, not me," and so on. Some more examples of individual barriers include income level, access to healthcare, transportation, lack of personal support, and having other illnesses. Group barriers. We've all heard, birds of a feather flock together. The people closest to you may create a barrier to recovery by continuing to enable unhealthy habits and choices, or discourage you from improving your situation and moving on. Even well-meaning friends and family members may obstruct someone's recovery because they are thinking more about maintaining their own role in the current dynamic than seeing the loved one get better, or potentially experience a relapse or setbacks. And they may lack the tools and resources necessary to support someone in recovery. Some other examples of group barriers include mistrust of the mental health system, denying there's a problem, and fitting into certain cultures. Provider barriers. Even providers can create barriers. Examples include long appointment wait times, rushed appointments, not fully listening to clients' needs, promoting shortcut options without considering the bigger picture, unhelpful and insensitive staff, and provider burnout and cynicism. Finally, there are system barriers. The design of the mental health system itself may undermine recovery. Examples of this include lack of training in recovery, lack of support for people working in the system, pushing medication as an easy solution, expecting people who are struggling to come to them, and having no direct access to immediate services. Stigma occurs on many levels and is pervasive throughout society and even in mental health systems. An individual may feel ashamed, embarrassed, afraid, or not know who to tell or what to do. Culture, trauma, and upbringing may contribute to internalized stigma. At the group level, other people may say, "Oh, yeah, you should go on SSI, you can't work again," or use work like crazy, and still using stigmatizing words among ourselves. Maybe we don't know how to talk about ourselves in a good way. Sometimes we engage in oppression Olympics where we say or think things like, "Well, I'm sicker than you're more privileged than I am," and so on. There's also infighting amongst peers. Culture may play a big role in stigmatizing mental illness as well. Some cultures just don't talk about it or may be less likely to seek outside help. People may be told to just suck it up. Other cultures and social groups may have historic mistrust of the psychiatric profession and therefore avoid seeking medical interventions or may choose not to recognize the existence of mental illness. At the provider system level, barriers may include the use of the medical model to the exclusion of the recovery model, a lack of understanding of recovery, paternalism, the idea that, "Oh, you'll be dealing with this the rest of your life," belabeling somebody by their diagnosis, such as referring to someone as a schizophrenic rather than a person living with schizophrenia, or engaging in disease-focused care. Providers receive a lot of training and education that paints people as victims or infantilizes people with mental illnesses. It's hard to rewrite those sort of things. Even if you use strengths-based language with this consumer, you have to turn around and document that they have a disease, a condition, a problem. Historically, there was a belief that people couldn't recover. Some conditions were thought to be especially problematic, and that people could never live successfully in society. Systems can be more focused on bean counting and streamlining than individualized patient-centered care. It's easier on a systems level to slap a label on someone and group people together than to look at each issue in isolation. Another barrier is the frenzied savior response. People who are struggling often have people in their lives who want to help them and they love them just so much that they want to do everything for them, including making choices for them. This may come from a sponsor, a clinician, a peer supporter, caretaker, or family member. Because we as the helper think we understand what the other person needs, we want to do it for them or direct them and their recovery step by step. We all went into this field because we want to help as much as possible. Maybe we even think we can save someone. If our desire to help goes too far, the target of our help feels incapable of doing those things for themselves or even babied. Yet, we often find ourselves throwing solutions at the symptoms, not the underlying problems, because the symptoms are easier to address. According to Pat Deacon, when faced with a person lost in anguish and apathy, a frequent response is what I call the frenzied savior response. We have all felt like this at one time or another in our work. The frenzied savior response goes like this. The more listless and apathetic the person gets, the more frenetically we act and become. The more they withdraw, the more we intrude. The more willless they become, the more willful we become. The more they give up, the harder we try. The more despairing they become, the more we indulge in shallow optimism. The more treatment plans they abort, the more plans we make for them. Needless to say, we soon find ourselves burnt out and exhausted, and then our anger sets in. Another way to describe the frenzied savior response is idiot compassion or codependence. As with frenzied savior, idiot compassion is doing good to someone rather than doing good for someone. This type of help is inwardly focused, enabling, controlling, and lacks understanding. Idiot compassion tends to try to solve the wrong problem. It can be self-indulgent and subtly aggressive. When the efforts of the person engaging in idiot compassion don't work, they can experience disillusionment, shame, and anger. So, what's a healthier, more productive way to show compassion? When we see someone suffering, a natural reaction is to identify the most obvious cause and try to eliminate it or pull the nail out of their head. We want to immediately stop their pain because we can't stand to see them suffering. But pulling out the nail for them won't result in long term success because the individual has not dealt with the reasons they allowed themselves to suffer to begin with. If the ultimate alleviation of that person's suffering is truly our goal, then we have to accept that this can only occur once the person identifies, accepts, and addresses the root cause of the problem that led to their suffering. We can offer temporary fixes, but we don't have the power ourselves to ultimately alleviate their suffering. It must come from within. Accepting this fact is hard because we have to overcome our own desires to rescue them and to fix the situation. However, we can help the person discover the root cause of the problem, explore possible ways to address it, and direct them to resources and support them through their journey. This means we have to maintain good boundaries, which can be hard to do. When you set good boundaries, for instance, if someone is engaging in self destructive activities, it's not the compassionate thing to keep allowing that to happen, allowing someone to keep being able to feed their self harm. The person may not want to address the root of the problem and may become extremely upset, and it can be quite difficult for you to go through the process of actually confronting the situation. But that's the compassionate thing to do. Taking the time to confront the situation and its root causes is also the compassionate thing to do for yourself, rather than allow yourself to waste time, effort, energy, and resources on solving the problem you wish existed, rather than the problem that actually does. And it's the most compassionate thing you can do for them, too. They may not thank you for it, and they may not be happy you did it, and they may experience an immediate increase in discomfort or suffering. But if there's any chance for them to take control and start to work on their problems, the roots of their suffering must be meaningfully addressed. This allows them to grow and ultimately feel empowered to take personal responsibility for making the changes they need. This is an image of the Gordian knot, a Greek legend associated with Alexander the Great. It is often used as a metaphor for an unsolvable problem, so disentangling the impossible knot that is easily solved by cheating or taking a shortcut, such as cutting the Gordian knot. Now, this metaphor works here because we often rely on medication as the easy solution to a complex problem. Medication is the sword that cuts the Gordian knot of mental illness. But what if the sword, in addition to undoing the knot, created additional problems? For instance, what if we needed to use the rope for other purposes? I mean, sure, the knot is gone, but the rope is now basically useless too. And what if there was something we could do to prevent a bunch of other ropes from getting knotted up to begin with? Well, the sword can't help with that. So, why do we often think this way? On the individual level, it's an easy fix. You can see it, you can measure it. Media and culture say to take medication to make things go away without anything else. Also, the imperative to use medication may prevent people from seeking help if they don't want to take meds for their condition. If the only way they'll be treated is by taking meds, then they may avoid care altogether. At the group level, there may be thinking along the lines of, well, I take medications, therefore you should take medications too. In fact, you should take my medications. While on the societal level, we have bought into the pill for everything mentality. And many people believe the only way to treat mental health conditions is through medication. We constantly hear about how so and so is or is not taking their meds, and society attributes crime to people with mental illnesses who aren't on their meds. We assume there is only one solution. At the provider level is often a successful, easy tool. How often do we say, well, maybe medication is not right for you? What would happen if we did? the individual probably wouldn't like it. And providers are often prevented from offering alternative treatments that may be just as effective or better than medication. And at the system level, medication is measurable and controllable. We can count it, we can quantify it, and it takes much less time and effort to provide than alternative solutions. But do you really think that every person served in the public mental health system needs medication? No, but the system doesn't allow people not to be on medication and still get care. They are labeled as non compliant if they don't take meds or prefer a different method of addressing their symptoms, and may be cut off from other resources they need to address important aspects of their recovery, such as housing. According to Dr. Mark Reagans, there's a perception that the most important obstacle to mental health and community living is refusal to take needed medications. This is only true for a subset of frustrating people. The other common obstacles include ongoing substance abuse, inability to control anger, often from childhood trauma, immediate gratification craving, and low frustration tolerance. Impaired cognitive abilities, so developmentally, brain damage or substance use, severe poverty and poor money Welcome to the management skills, physical illnesses, especially chronic pain, learned helplessness and hopelessness, stealing, and an inability to tolerate being around other people. We need to make highly individualized assessments and recovery plans using a whole team of people with different skills and life experiences to help them engage in our program, overcome these obstacles, and become more self responsible and self reliant. So, how can we say that there are many pathways to recovery if we require everyone in the public mental health system to take medication? Here is a brief video with Dr. Mark Reagans on why depression can be so hard to treat and why medication is more complex than it may seem.
Why is depression so hard to treat?
That's a good question, and let me first separate out two different kinds of depression since we no longer do this anymore. When I was young and learning, I learned there was two kinds of depression. One kind of depression is if bad stuff happens to you, and anybody would be depressed in this situation, then you're depressed. That was called exogenous depression, and it came from the outside. Endogenous depression, coming from the inside, meant I don't see why you're depressed. There's nothing that bad going on, but you're very negative and down and slowed and can't think and thinking about killing yourself and stuff. Why are you that bad? And our idea was that people with endogenous depression, those are chemicals causing it, a pill ought to fix this. And if it was exogenous depression, something in your life, changing your life ought to fix this. Except that it turned out that pills work just as well no matter why you're depressed. So we got rid of that distinction, called everybody just depression, and started giving pills to everybody. At the present time, 14% of all adult Americans have taken antidepressants. This doesn't mean that there's a huge amount of chemical imbalances rolling around in the world. This means there's a lot of common human misery rolling around the world. The label of depression often hides what's causing it underneath. Depression is a final pathway for other things. So, for example, you can be depressed because your child is taken away. You can be depressed because you're homeless. You can be depressed because you use a lot of alcohol or speed. You can be depressed because you have schizophrenia, because you went off to the war and were traumatized, because your brain is injured, because you have pancreatitis, because you have diabetes, because your mother died, because you're getting old and weak, because you're in chronic pain, all kinds of stuff. So number one, why is this hard? Because we don't drill down enough. We just say it's depression, here's a pill, and expect that to work. Really, what are the odds of that working if you don't address any of the other things? It just isn't that easy. The question really should be, why are we surprised that depression is hard? Why do we think it should be easy? You come in terribly depressed and a mess and all these things going right, and you really think, like on TV, I'm going to take a pill and then I'll be marching through the flowers. Get serious. How is that going to work? And then to say, if your pill didn't work, take another pill or a higher dose. We've gotten incredibly pill reliant and also incredibly reliant. My professional's going to fix me. I'll leave it up to them. If you want to get better from depression, you're going to have to do some stuff of your own. Pills may help too, but you're going to have to do stuff. And here's a quick list for you of things that I've gotten this from people who've gotten themselves out of serious depressions, and I've never met anyone who got better without doing any of these things. You don't have to do all of them, but you have to do something. Here's some things you can do. 1, talk to other people instead of isolating. I never met anybody who stayed in their room depressed waiting for it to go away, and that worked. 2, actually feel your feelings and emotions instead of trying to deaden them, medicate them, avoid them, or get high. You are your feelings, and if you just deny those and try to get rid of them, you're getting rid of you and leaving yourself with a dead self. 3, learn some emotional coping skills. Actually, mental health professionals are quite good at helping with this. Once you're feeling feelings, get better at it. 4, learn how to use medications instead of just taking them. Don't just say, well, the doctor gave me this, I don't know. Learn how to use them. How do they make your life better? There's a lot of different ones, different dosages. Get good at your own meds. 5, start doing stuff that makes you fun and interesting. Either new stuff or stuff you used to do. If you're sitting around doing nothing, you're going to be bored, you're going to be uninteresting, you're going to stay depressed. 6, actually take some responsibility for yourself and stop blaming everybody else. You're going to stay depressed if you're waiting for the rest of the world to be nice to you in some way. My mom did this, the landlord did this, the Republican Party did this, something or other. Take responsibility for your own life. 7, go to work even when you're not feeling well. Staying at home doing nothing is not a vacation or retirement. It's really demoralizing and keeps you in poverty and with nothing to do with hours. Even if it's hard to get to work, work is incredibly therapeutic, incredibly useful for getting a better life. 8, do things outside of being a mental patient. Don't have your whole life revolve around doctor visits and pills and day treatment and your board and care of things that happen. Get other things going in your life with people who aren't depressed. 9, work on your physical health and wellness. People with mental illnesses are dying 20 to 25 years younger than everyone else. A good deal of this is because they're smoking, not exercising, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterols, and hypertension. Actually get out there and do something for your own physical health. There's been studies, but no one funds these because it doesn't help any drug company, that shows that exercise helps a great deal in being depressed. Of course, who feels like doing exercise when you are depressed? You got to make yourself do stuff, and then instead of the vicious cycle, you start a positive cycle. Number 10, love other people. You've probably been hurt along the way and rejected and heartbroken and all this stuff. That means you were in love. If you try to protect yourself from bad feelings, you're never going to connect to other people, and loneliness leads to more depression. Here's a really tough one, number 11. Work on acceptance and forgiveness instead of blaming and anger. If you're holding on the past with anger and blaming instead of letting it go through forgiveness and acceptance, you may need spiritual help to do this. Then you can get out of the depression. 12, give back to others. Help others out, and that helps you out. And 13, find meanings and blessings in your sufferings and reconnect to God and spirituality. Get the higher source of strength, whatever it is in your life, to get through the depression. Getting out of depression is going to be hard. You're going to have to do a great deal to do it. Any of these things, start them and start the cycle going upwards instead of down.
So, what about informed consent? Informed consent is a legal requirement in which the physician must explain to the patient the diagnosis, the nature of the recommended treatment, including the risk involved and the chances of success, and the alternative methods of treatment that are available. Why does informed consent matter? Well, sometimes side effects can be worse than the symptoms. Well, what about long-term side effects of psychotropic drugs? They have major side effects that can significantly shorten one's lifespan. And new evidence is emerging that other treatments and lifestyle changes can be just as effective as medication, but they just don't offer that quick fix. Well, why do we think that people with a mental health condition are incapable of giving informed consent? If we have no legal justification for treating someone as though they are incompetent, we must assume that they can give consent with the right information and guidance. Therefore, we must always obtain informed consent. even if they are presently unwell. Yet we often treat people with mental illness like they are inherently incompetent and bypass informed consent because we think they just won't get it. And if we take the time to explain and offer alternatives, this bias is harmful. Failure to obtain truly informed consent is just not good medicine. We need to address an uncomfortable truth. Many of us enter the helping professions, especially mental health, because we are seeking to meet our own needs through helping others. Sometimes we attempt to address our own unresolved issues through the work we do. So it can be challenging to our self-image to critically examine whether our own stuff may actually be hindering our effectiveness with the people we serve. Are we doing this to help us or to help them? If we truly are in this to help them, shouldn't we be open to all possible pathways to recovery, even if that pathway minimizes our own role or contribution to the process? The medical model is pervasive. It may be our only frame of reference. It may provide the lens through which we not only interpret others, but ourselves as well. But it has its limitations, which we will discuss in the next section. It's never too late to learn new tools that may lead to better outcomes for the people we serve. Medical treatments and interventions serve a purpose, but recovery doesn't begin and end there. We've also been taught that the medical problems must be treated with medical intervention, even if many non-medical factors converge to eventually result in the medical problem. We don't recognize the interplay between risk factors and protective factors, and therefore aren't taught to value protective factors such as social support, physical activity, eating well, stable housing and income, and access to transportation for their contributions to mental health. On the other hand, it has become a popular pastime to bash the medical model and mental health professionals in reaction to ineffective or even harmful treatment, perceived provider stigma, and or a dissatisfaction with the service delivery system. These disappointments are understandable, but they ignore the positive contributions of professional help. Peer support is not a replacement for clinical support. Some ways in which we see this devaluation of professional help play out include, well, if I am told that I, as a consumer or peer, have the responsibility for my recovery, I may wonder why I need anyone else and reject professional help. Well, while it's true that not everyone needs professional help, mental health professionals really do have a lot of knowledge and resources to offer. Peers often feel we can help each other, so we don't need clinicians or other practitioners. We assume they just don't understand and decide to fix it our own way. Because recovery has many pathways, we shouldn't discount any of the pathways. Professional help is very useful for some people. Professionals may also question the value of their own education and training when consumers have access to other supports. The reality is all specialists have a lot to offer in their scope, and incorporating recovery concepts into practice will enhance the value of professional care. We'll end this section with a moving video, which provides an excellent example of how we can all do little things to remove barriers for others.
Evet, kameraman kaydı gitsin arkadaşlar.
Manav hazır ol. Şimdi.
Hareket. Arkadaşlar 30 saniye sonra meydandayız. Anlaşıldı.
Next, we'll discuss the case for recovery in mental health services. What are some reasons to use a recovery-oriented approach in practice? This list was developed by Dr. Mark Reagans, who is the medical director at the Village Integrated Service Agency, a program of MHA Los Angeles, which is an award-winning model of recovery-based mental health care. Dr. Reagans has worked at the Village since its beginning in 1990 as a psychiatrist. His practice and vision have been grounded in more than 20 years of ongoing clinical work with some of the most underserved and difficult to engage people in the community. Over the years, he has been very active in promoting system change, focusing on integrated services, rehabilitation, and recovery for people with serious mental illnesses. So the top 10 reasons to use recovery-based practices in mental health care are when people don't believe they have a mental illness and you want to help anyway. When people don't do what you tell them to do. When people can't be cured and have to live with significant symptoms. When the illness has swallowed them up and become their identity and their whole life. When substance use is a major issue and you want to integrate substance abuse and mental health services. When their culture leads to a different understanding of mental illness and their use of services than your own understanding. When trauma is a major issue and you want to help without re-traumatizing them. When hopelessness and passivity have taken over. When people have significant strengths and want to take on more self-responsibility. And when people want to go on with their lives in the real world. But those aren't the only reasons to use the recovery model of care. Recovery is evidence-based, is a MHSA requirement, and it addresses the limitations of the medical model. Recovery is evidence-based. What that means is systematic studies have shown that using the recovery model results in improved outcomes, more so than is possible by chance alone. Recovery is a MHSA or Prop 63 requirement. This is more relevant to the public mental health system, but this can inform what we do in private practice as well. If you are unfamiliar with the MHSA, it is a voter initiative passed in November of 2004 and took effect in January of 2005. It created additional funding and resources for the public mental health system and sought to transform the system through expansion of services and an improved continuum and integration of care. If your program is funded by the MHSA, the services you provide must be recovery-oriented. It's mandatory. The MHSA calls for significant increases in the levels of participation and involvement of clients and families in all aspects of the public mental health system, including but not limited to planning, policy development, service delivery, and evaluation. The MHSA also calls for increases in consumer operated services such as drop in centers, peer support programs, warm lines, crisis services, case management programs, self help groups, family partnerships, parent and family education, and consumer provided training and advocacy services. The MHSA also includes peer support, employment of consumers and family members, housing supports, community based care, individualized plans, full service partnerships, known as Whatever It Takes, and stakeholder and community input. If you would like more information on the MHSA, please view Access's MHSA Basic eLearning module. The recovery model also addresses the shortcomings of the medical model. That is not to say the medical model should be tossed out. It is useful in that it is succinct, provides common language and terminology, has tangible and quantifiable factors, and is objective with measurable outcomes. However, we tend to overly rely on the medical model out of habit and conditioning, and it does not call into question any existing paradigms. The medical model misses external risk and protective factors and individual experiences, motivations, and differences. It also does not typically examine the psychological impacts of illness and treatment approaches, nor is there examination of biases and judgments that exist within, and sometimes because of, the model itself. In the medical model, the illness is the focus, and the person with a diagnosis is a passive recipient of treatment. So, I help you. The medical model assumes that once the diagnosis is treated with a medical intervention, the person can go back to being whole again, or living a productive and fulfilling life in the community. The recovery model incorporates areas that the medical model overlooks or lacks the tools and resources to address. In the recovery model, the person with a mental health diagnosis is the driver of the experience. So, I help you. Because illnesses don't recover, people do. And many factors influence an individual's recovery path. This takes more time because we're not just treating an illness in a routine and predictable manner. We're working with a unique human being who has greater control over the outcome than any medical intervention can provide. We can visualize the recovery model by asking mental health professionals, what resources do you wish your clients had that would help them achieve and maintain wellness? And what factors impact your client's mental health that are outside of the scope of your practice? So all this sounds great, but what if someone refuses medication or makes really bad decisions or is incapable of implementing good choices or just seems destined to fail? Well, people need to have the dignity of risk and the right to fail. A key point of the recovery model is that it is not the role of providers to make decisions for consumers, but professionals do have a responsibility to provide education about the possible outcomes that may result from various decisions. Many providers first react with concern when they hear that mental health consumers should make decisions about their own care. Let's explore these concerns in a little more detail. Refusing medication. Legally, no adult can be forced to take medications or undergo certain treatments unless there's a court order or legal guardian directing them to do so. The recovery model does not advocate anything different. The reality of practice, though, is that mental health consumers, particularly those with more chronic and debilitating disorders, are usually instructed as to what treatments and medications to take, with minimal effort to involve them in the decisions. The recovery model states that a program's philosophy should acknowledge and encourage consumer involvement and decision-making. Most consumers do ultimately ask for and take clinicians' treatments recommendations, but Consumers need to know that they have both the right and the responsibility to make those decisions. Beyond clinical judgment or scientific evidence, concerns arise if a consumer's decision is likely to cause harm. Refusing medications has a possibility of harm, depending on the medication. Each case needs careful consideration and consultation with other relevant providers. When a consumer's decision is unlikely to cause serious harm, our job is to help educate them as to possible benefits and consequences of their decision, including if that means a possibility of involuntary hospitalization. But in the end, to let them make those decisions. When a decision is likely to cause serious harm, then we should, as always, intervene as to prevent the harm. What if the person makes bad decisions or can't make good choices or seems destined to fail? We need to teach people to make healthy decisions, not make these decisions ourselves. We call this doing the math with them, not for them. This means we discuss all the factors with them that are relevant to their decision, which helps us determine the person's true motivations for making the quote-unquote bad decision and the goals they are trying to accomplish through that decision. We inform them of the risk, the steps necessary to reach the intended goal, and offer alternative or less harmful strategies to meet their needs. Ultimately, we must still allow the individual to make their own decisions and not impose on them what we think is right. For example, let's say someone who is currently unwell announces they want to move out of their parents' home and get their own place. Well, rather than attacking their decision because I personally don't think they are capable of living independently, I might ask, well, why do you want your own place? So if they suggest that they're seeking more autonomy, maybe I can suggest other ways to get that need met. Maybe I could ask, how will you pay your rent and utilities each month? Will you have money left over for groceries, personal care, recreation, and emergencies? Can you afford to live alone? Are you willing to share a place with other people if you can't afford to live alone? What will you do if your housemates don't pay their share of rent and utilities or have bad habits you just can't deal with? Even if the person still concludes that they want to move out, at least they are making an informed decision, and I can help them develop a plan to achieve their goal and address any potential issues that arise. The following quote from Pat Deegan sums us up nicely. Have we embraced the concept of the dignity of risk and the right to failure? Chronically normal people, or CNPs, or people who have not been psychiatrically labeled, are allowed to make dumb, uninsightful decisions all the time in their lives. My favorite example is Elizabeth Taylor, who just got her 8th divorce. And we might say, oh, she lacks insight. She's failing to learn from her past experiences. However, when she embarks on marriage number 9, no SWAT team of nurses will descend upon her, quote, in her best interest. We just imagine if a person with a psychiatric disability were to announce their treatment team they were about to get married for the 9th time. People learn, and sometimes don't learn from failures. We must be careful to distinguish between a person making, from our perspective, a dumb or self-defeating choice, and a person who is truly at risk. The final part of this module will discuss creating and sustaining a recovery-oriented workplace. Briefly, a few strategies to promote recovery-oriented care include peer support services, WISE tools and training, RAP, common ground, quality of life prescriptions such as health leads, and the MORS, MORS. Strategy 1 is utilizing peer support positions. In general, a peer is anyone similar in experience and or background to you, an equal. People, and not just people with mental health diagnosis, often like to talk or work with those who have similar experiences. So just think of who you like to go to lunch with. People who have like experiences can better relate and can consequently offer more authentic empathy and validation. No one would tell any of these people not to see a medical professional, and peers don't either. Peer support is not like clinical support, nor is it just being friends. Unlike clinical help, peer support helps people to understand each other because they've been there. They've shared similar experiences and can model for each other a willingness to learn and grow. People come to a peer support program because it feels safe and accepting. By sharing experiences and building trust, peers help each other move beyond their perceived limitations, old patterns, and ways of thinking about mental health. This allows members of the peer community to try out new behaviors and move beyond the illness culture into a culture of health and ability. So, where did peer support come from? Well, peer support in mental health grew out of a civil and human rights movement in which people allied around the experience of negative mental health treatment. At this time, coercion, over medication, rights violations, as well as over medicalized versions of an individual's story was common. Then, in 1995, one study found that case management services plus a peer specialist counselor were associated with enhanced quality of life, fewer major life problems, and greater gains in social support for those receiving such services than for those receiving case management services without a peer. So, how does peer support work? The peer principle refers to finding affiliation with someone with similar life experience and having an equal relationship. So, for example, someone says yesterday in group, "When I heard you say that you don't bathe when you're not well, I knew you were someone who could understand me, because that's true for me too." The helper principle refers to the notion that being helpful to someone else is also self healing. Peers assisting others in a healthy manner is also good for the peer's own healing. Peer support emphasizes empowerment. Some examples of this include finding hope and believing that recovery is possible, taking personal responsibility for making it happen, showing that someone with a diagnosis can contribute meaningfully, and peers being very motivated to empower others to achieve recovery too. Advocacy. Here, advocacy refers to self and systems advocacy skills, and this includes promoting client choice and decision making opportunities, as well as skill development, positive risk taking, reciprocity, support, a sense of community, self help, and developing awareness. Peer support teaches clients how to advocate for themselves, especially by using examples from the peer's own experience. Here are just a few services that peer providers can provide: support groups, peer counseling, advocacy, personal plan creation, RAP, health education and navigation, cultural brokerage, services referral, benefits and healthcare acquisition, and crisis intervention. Another strategy for creating and sustaining a recovery-oriented workplace is to take advantage of WISE trainings. WISE stands for Workforce Integration, Support, and Education, and is a program of NorCal MHA funded by the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. The goal of WISE is to help employers in California's public mental health system recruit and retain consumer and family member staff through genuine workforce integration. Some of WISE's services are listed here, and you can also find more information by visiting the WISE website at wiseup.org. RAP is another useful strategy for the workplace. RAP stands for Wellness Recovery Action Plan and is an evidence-based practice developed by the Copeland Center. A RAP is a structured system of self-monitoring distressing feelings and behaviors. RAP trainings are delivered by certified RAP facilitators in a workshop-style setting. The core concepts of RAP are hope, personal responsibility, education, self-advocacy, and support. You might notice that these core concepts are very similar to the essential elements of the MHSA we reviewed earlier. Strategy 4 is Common Ground, a web-based application that helps clients prepare to meet with psychiatrists or treatment teams and arrive at the best decisions for your treatment and recovery. Common Ground focuses on shared decision-making to foster a collaborative client-practitioner relationship and identify effective treatments and services. You can learn more about shared decision-making in the Access Shared Power and Collaborative Decision-Making e-learning. Here's how Common Ground works. Before the appointment, the client, with or without a peer helper, creates a one-page health report summarizing their current condition, concerns, needs, and goals. During the appointment, the health report acts like an amplifier, helping the doctor to quickly understand the client's goals, concerns, and progress in order to arrive at a shared decision regarding a treatment plan and the next steps. After the appointment, the shared decision is printed for the client to take as a reminder about what to do for the next appointment. Strategy 5 is quality of life prescriptions, as demonstrated by Health Leads. Health Leads is a very successful model that is working in communities throughout the country, including right here in California in the Bay Area. We can use peer support and model our public mental health services on the Health Leads approach. Here's how it works. Families visit a Health Leads partner hospital or health center where the clinical team screens them for basic needs that can affect their health, like food and heat. Healthcare providers then prescribe resources to meet these needs. Then, Health Leads advocates fill these prescriptions by working side by side with patients to connect them with the basic resources they need to be healthy. Some examples of the types of things Health Leads prescribes include food assistance, housing search and conditions, income supports, fuel and utilities assistance, health insurance, job searches and trainings, adult education, child care, clothing, and after-school programs. The last strategy we will cover is the Milestones of Recovery Scale, or MORS. Developed by Dr. Mark Reagans, the MORS measures levels of risk, engagement, skills, and external supports. Answers on the MORS are used to recommend different growth-oriented services based on various stages, including employment, medication, housing, crisis, and crisis management. That concludes the Access California Recovery 101 e-learning. Just to recap, this training covered the meaning of recovery, key components of recovery, including person-centered and client-driven care, barriers to recovery, the case for recovery in mental health services, and ways to create and sustain a recovery-oriented workplace. Thank you for attending this presentation. Please reach out to us anytime over the web, by email, phone, or social media.